think for many of us, and myself included, we want this to go away as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's our natural human reaction to pain, either physically or psychologically. Let's get rid of this. This is a blip. So let's jump right back in. And then the first time someone's asked the question, so what happened? Why did you leave? We're like, oh, I didn't prepare for that question. And it's very important to prepare for that question. And as I say, to take your time before you go back into the arena. The answer to that question should always be something like, I brought them to the best point that I could, and now I want to help you. So in other words, it's not about you and your pain. It's about what the company needed to do, and switch as quickly as possible into what can I offer you.
Welcome to the Warriors at Work show. This is Jeannie Coomber, your guide and host. This is a show for men and women in the workplace who want to move from the predictable to the potent. This is your weekly dose of inspiration with an edge. I talk with CEOs and shamans, sports marketing executives and therapists. All of us are like-minded thinkers and doers who tell stories, share wisdom, and challenge each other to have the best life possible inside and outside the office. Welcome to your Warrior Conversation.
Hey everybody, it's Jeannie. Thank you so much for joining me here at Warriors at Work. This week, I bring to you a conversation I had with author and executive Robin Merle, who authored the book Involuntary Exit, A Woman's Guide to Thriving After Being Fired. We've all seen the books on leadership and resilience and how you overcome difficulties, but this book really struck me because it speaks to a very painful topic that a lot of people just don't talk about. And I liked this book because not only does it relay her experience having been let go, but she interviewed countless women, very accomplished, who were suddenly severed from their organizations. And the book relays the experience, but it quickly gets into the advice, the emotions you might be experiencing. And then my favorite part of this conversation and the book is how many success stories have come from these difficulties. So this is a conversation for anybody that has been fired, or maybe you're questioning whether or not you should move on. I really think this is going to help you to rediscover your value and remind you of your power and your importance, and maybe even emerge even stronger, even better on the back end. Enjoy. Welcome, Robin Merle, to Warriors at Work. I'm delighted to have you here and to have this conversation with you.
Thank you, Jeannie. I am so thrilled to be here, and I can't wait to start talking.
This was such an important book for me, and as I mentioned to you, it really struck me on a lot of levels, and it's going to come out in a lot of the questions and what we're going to talk about. Where I want to start is you're an accomplished and nationally recognized executive for your work in the nonprofit space. I mean, you've helped raise over $500 million in philanthropy in your career. And today, we're going to talk about how you, a very smart, highly recognized, highly profitable executive, manage an experience of termination. And the book that you created called Involuntary Exit, which is also an expression you adopted or created, I should say. And this is a book that not only provides like a really brave, honest, practical look at it, but you added the thoughts and feelings and experiences and advice of other women executives who had gone through the same experience. So let's first start by having you tell us who Robin is in your own words.
Thanks, Jeannie. Well, given your introduction, I think that there are plenty of women like me, and what I discovered after I wrote my book, plenty of people who have had this experience. I did not realize that. I did not realize this would be an evergreen topic, but apparently it is. And I'm very, very delighted that my book can be helpful to those. So who am I? Well, that's a tough question, right? Because we have many years of who we are. And so I would say at bottom, I am a writer. I was trained as a fiction writer. I'm also a salesperson, which comes in handy because I wrote for advertising and then I became a writer for fundraising where I have to sell the mission of an organization. And I'm also somebody who likes to give back, which is why the nonprofit world appeals to me so much. So, as my family would say, that I talk and write for a living. And to some extent that is true. But the writing part of me is really what propelled almost every career step I took. It helped me get promoted. It helped me. I was a ghostwriter for executives before I was an executive.
Hmm.
I was a ghostwriter for celebrities. When you write for fundraising, you write for all sorts of prominent people. And I had gone through this experience of real joy in my work, real joy. I loved the people I worked with. I loved my bosses. I loved the boards. I loved the mission. And that's why I am what I call in my book a loyalist, somebody who
Mm.
stays at an organization for 10 years or more. It was my community. So when I had my involuntary exit, what did I do? I went to write about it, to really figure out what I thought, to have a cathartic experience. And I also had no idea how to talk about this. I had
Mm.
never had anything like this. I was a type A, top performer, wasn't let go because of performance. And so I reached out to other women to tell my story, and I ended up telling their stories as well. And that goes back to what I said at the top of this question, that so many have had this experience, some more than once, and yet we never talked about it.
Yeah. So let's get into this beautiful book.
Mhm,
As I said, I find it both practical and so loving. And so I
mhm,
want to read something from the very, very beginning of the book because I really think it sets the tone. And then after I read it, I'd love for you to share your thoughts.
mhm,
So this is chapter 1. You were fired. Now what? The first 24 hours after being fired may be the most difficult of all. There are practical steps to take, emotional waves to manage, and the yearning for privacy and peace while having to perform with a public persona. Often you must make quick decisions when you don't know whom to trust, what you can say, and how honest you want to be. You are psychologically dislodged, as one female CEO put it. Therapists call this cognitive dissonance when your thoughts and core beliefs don't sync with the reality that you're experiencing. Take comfort in the fact that the dissonance will wane and your immediate pain and anger will subside as you acclimate to your new way of life.
mhm.
So, what I love about that is it's very direct, gets right into it, sets the tone for here's what you can expect. But again, it points to you're going to be okay. That's how I interpreted it. Was
That's
that
right.
your intention on how
Yeah,
you approach the book?
yeah, that's right. And typically, people will pick up this book at that initial pain point.
Mm,
And they will find comfort in the fact that, yes, it is painful. It is shocking. You are totally dislodged because you have just lost an identity that you've been living for quite some time inside that company. And you're cut off
mm,
from, literally cut off from the people that you saw and spoke with every day. And what I want to get across is it's a process, it takes time.
mm,
You will go through these emotional waves of pain and anger and guilt and shame, and you name it. It's like a layer cake,
mm,
but you will come out stronger than you ever imagined you could. And I'm not a Pollyanna. I understand it doesn't feel that way at all in the beginning. And it's the matter of time, reflection, processing, and really giving yourself the grace
Mm.
to grieve and then to recover. And the people that I interviewed for the book, I'm in touch with some of them to this day.
Mm.
They're in a much better place with a
Yes.
much larger perspective of how they were suffering before or how what happened to them, and I know this is kind of woo woo, almost had to happen to them
Yeah.
to have more professional and personal growth.
Yeah, and we're gonna get into that too because the way you wrap up the book, speaks
Mhm.
to about what's on the other side of this. But you
Yeah.
you talked about grieving, and I think it's important for me to point out that you use a bereavement model by, John Bowlby and Colin Murray Parkers, which is for children who've experienced loss, and it's a key framework in the book, and it's shock and numbness, yearning and searching, disorientation and disorganization, and then reorganization and resolution. And it's very much how you structured the book. I'd love for you to share your perspective on why'd you choose this model? Because obviously the Kubler-Ross model is probably the most common around grief cycles, but you chose this for you personally, and I'm curious also on your own process, which was most difficult for you of those stages?
A great question. I chose it because it has to deal with separation and attachment.
Mm.
And the phases that they describe of children losing, it's horrible, losing a parent, losing that attachment, and then being separated from it, to me, really corresponded to the way that we are so attached to our community and our identity,
Mm.
and then we're suddenly separated from it. And the phases that he goes through that you mentioned, shock and numbness, yearning and searching, disorganization, and then reorganization, really corresponded to what I heard women go through and what I went through. And there's no saying how long each phase goes, and it's not linear
Mm.
as it wasn't for those children that he worked with, that they worked with. You can jump, you know, many of us type A's want to jump from stage 1 to stage 4 without
That's
doing the
right.
work in between. And what happens is we suddenly see someone, let's say from our old organization, and we're right back to yearning and searching, right? For why this
Mm.
happened and why we're in the situation we are. So I want to make sure people know it's not linear and it's not a challenge where you're okay, I've gotten this stage done and now I'm going to the next stage. It really does go back and forth. But I thought that that analogy of being separated suddenly from a community you were so attached to was the right analogy. For me, I would say the most difficult stage was yearning and searching,
Mm.
yearning for things to be the way they were, yearning for even the programs I was working on. I hadn't seen them finished. For the company of the people I spent every day with, who I really enjoyed, and then searching for clues as to why. Was it
Mhm.
something I said? Was it this? Was it that? Was it my behavior here? Usually that searching revolves around someone saying, "What did I do wrong?" And the irony is the
Yeah.
person didn't do anything wrong. The company made a decision for business reasons. But
Mm.
of course, when it's so mystifying and we're one of the collateral pieces of damage of that decision, we always say, well, what did I do wrong? And that's why I also say in my book that this is not a good exercise to engage in, that you really have to look forward instead of backwards. But I will tell you something that has happened 5, 7 years later. There are still people from that community coming up to me trying to explain what happened.
Is that right?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. And what did that tell me? that this disruption affected them
Yeah.
in their worlds, not as much as me, but it did affect them in their worlds. It was a disruption. It was a shift in direction.
Mm.
And how do I respond to that? Mostly I really am beyond that. I don't need to hear that.
Mhm. What do you say when they start to share specific details or their own experience? Because my guess is, there's probably a little bit of survivor guilt and or
Yes.
it probably kicked up a lot of uncertainty for them. What does that organization mean? If this can happen to Robin, it can happen to
Yes.
me.
Yes. Yes. I I I listen.
Mm,
I if there's something they're telling me that's surprising, I respond to that.
mm,
I give them room to vent, basically, and to explain how they're feeling. And then I move on. And
mm.
sometimes, and I say this in the book, even this many years later, I have questions, so what really happened?
Yeah.
And I just say, it is what it is.
Mhm.
It just, that this is what took place. And how are you, Jeannie?
Yeah, yes,
And
yes.
change the subject, because once when you process all of that and what people will understand, after the rawness goes away and you are in a situation of reorganization and resolution, this is your new life, those questions aren't as stabbing and painful as
Mm.
they once were. And, you can walk away from that conversation saying, I really am changed. I really am living a new life. This is good.
Yeah. Well, I wanna build on the advice piece, which is what you just
Yeah.
offer there, because how you give best advice periodically throughout the book, and
Hmm.
I loved it. And one of the things that I thought was so helpful was how often you would jump in with an advice or perspective based upon a particular
Hmm.
story. And earlier in the book, you share insights of a relationship with HR and the company on severance packages. And I want to read to you one of the best advice ideas you offer, and then I would love for you to give context or a thought. And the advice was this: do not tie your value to the severance package. It's a negotiation, not a value statement. That's why lawyers exist, to negotiate without your emotional filter. So say more.
Hmm. So I was a little concerned about the HR part that I wrote about when I said HR is not your friend. And I remember speaking to a president of a company, and she said, "Oh, everybody knows that. Everybody doesn't know that." Which
Mm,
and I said, "No, I don't think they do. I think they think that HR, even high level executives, will come to their aid and help them, but HR works for the company, right?" So, in the same way as you said at the top of this, that you're in the room when conversations are happening about letting people go,
mhm,
it's about a conversation in the room, your severance, about what the company wants to do at that point, given all these different business factors. And as I said, I'm in fundraising, and every ask in fundraising is some form of a negotiation.
mhm,
Does it relate to the value of the program? No. Does it relate to what the donor wants to give? Yes. Yes. And why? Because they have a certain finite set of funding, they have other commitments, they're figuring this out as a business decision. So, in the same way we think, what did I do wrong?
mm,
Which is a wrong direction, not a wrong, but which is not the direction you want to be thinking. It's not about your value. It's what the company deems they can do at this point for a wide variety of reasons. At least that's my thinking. I don't know what yours is, Jeannie, because
mm.
you've been in this space for a long time.
I think again, it's a very honest, practical approach to it. And what
Mhm.
struck me about it is the importance of recognizing this is a business.
Yes.
Even though this has affected you personally, that's a business discussion and a business arrangement, and it's important to get
Mhm.
someone who's not emotionally tied to
Right.
wherever you are to negotiate that in a way that represents your contributions. And I
Yes.
that's what I really, really liked about this. There's just so many parts of this book that jumped out at me, and a few that I also wanna highlight and ask that you say more. I wanna first start with, and you just touched on this a moment ago, is many high-performing executives with stellar reviews are
Mhm.
terminated, and you say performance may not necessarily be the issue. So I'd love for you to share.
People get bonuses, they get promoted, all sorts of things happen before they're let go. Not just in my case, but in other people's case. Yes, in some cases, performance may be an issue, but I would say 90% of the people I spoke with, that was not the issue. The
Mm,
issue was some other business decision, some other relationship that came into play, a new leadership came in, new directions came in. And so at these high level transitions, it's rarely the motivating factor.
mm,
One of the biggest uh, transition changers is new leadership.
mm,
They come in, they have to prove themselves. They bring in people that they're comfortable with, so if they can. They take a look at everything. They've been hired and tasked to do something in the direction of more, better, best, right?
mhm.
And at that point, no matter, I've heard so many women say, well, I'm going to see how it goes. Eh, You really have to, at that point, if you haven't already, begin to develop your outside network
Mhm.
because it's a clean slate with a new leader.
Interesting. The other thing that I'd love to talk about is, which I this really resonated with me, is how someone talks about their termination in an
Yeah.
interview. There was a story that you highlighted where this woman really took her time to think about her story in her own words. She wasn't influenced by the recruiter, the coach, people in her network. She really sat with it, did the work, and came up with her own language. So, share your thoughts there.
I think for many of us, and myself included, we want this to go away as quickly as possible.
Mhm.
Because that's our natural human reaction to pain, either physically or psychologically. Let's get rid of this. This is a blip. So let's jump right back in and just get right back on that train again and talk about what we offer and reinstate our value. And then the first
Mm.
time someone's asked the question, so what happened? Why did you leave? We're like, oh, I didn't prepare for that question.
Right, right.
And we're kind of stumped. And it's very important to prepare for that question. And as I say, to take your time before you go back into the arena, because the answer to that question should always be something like, again, there was a business decision in my company. I brought them to the to the best point that I could, and now I want to help you. So, in other words, it's not about you and your pain. It's about what the company needed to do and switch as quickly as possible into what can I offer you?
Mm.
This advice, this post book came to me from a recruiter who is the CEO of her own recruiting company. And she said, what we're looking for is that somebody is still not in that frame of mind of revenge and anger and shame, that they can say the name of their former company without gritting their teeth, that they're healthy enough to begin contributing again to a new organization. We all know we usually stay in one field or maybe two or three, but we know that communication travels in a circle.
Yeah.
And we know that people in that field kind of understand what cultures are like in different organizations, and they themselves may have been let go in a difficult situation, and they know what those people are like. So it's not as if you have to justify in being on the market. The idea is it was time to move on, however you say that. And I give different examples in my book of how to say that, but basically to present with confidence and with health that you're ready
Mm.
to bring your value to their organization.
Yeah, I love that. That you're ready and with health. I love that.
Mhm.
I also want to talk about the networking mechanics, if you will, because you even get some specifics in here, and you gave some great steps of networking. And I'm going to read the last one that's referenced, because I'd love for you to give a little context here. If you decide to put yourself out there, be focused, network with a talk track and a plan of what you want to find out from the people you will be speaking with. It may not even be about opportunities. You may find yourself curious about how someone ended up in their current position, especially if it is much different than the previous role. You may want to know how they got their start in a business and what they are still most proud of achieving. I always felt a conversation had been successful if I came away with was just one new idea that helped me think about my situation in a different way. It's a totally different take on networking. So
Mhm.
I'd love for you to say more.
So let's say we've been in our company, whatever company it is, whether 2 years or 10 years, we're in a bubble. We are
Yeah.
just in a bubble. We have
Yes.
no idea how people think about their own careers. We have no idea what they did to get to where they are. And it is, to me, fascinating to find out. Intellectual curiosity is probably at the base of almost everything I do. I'm just curious. How did you start this podcast, Jeannie? What made you start it? Think
Mm,
questions like that. And you may tell me something that will make me think, oh, maybe I should really figure out what kinds of things I want to bring to the world. How do I do that? And then I start talking to somebody else and somebody else. It's not about the transactional work of getting a job. And again, I make this parallel with fundraising. When you ask for funds, it's not about, can you give me $5 because it's get somebody said Giving Friday Day. But it's about building relationships. And
mm,
so the networking that I talk about is about doing just that, getting to know the other person, because you never know. You
mhm.
never know who can help you, who they know who can help you, and what they might say to get you thinking about
Yeah.
your own world in a different way. And in fact, and I'm going to have a post coming out about this. I spoke at a conference, a leadership conference, and they just said, I don't really like the word networking. And I said, well, what do you like? And they said, let's talk about building relationships. I said, okay, that's what I like. So that's how we talked about doing it, so that people didn't feel like they were in a position to make a sales pitch about
Mm.
themselves, which is what people kind of think, or they have to walk into a room and suddenly, come away with five new connections that are going to bring something to them. I think that kind of that frame of mind is much too stressful for
Yeah.
a lot of us.
It really brings the humanity into the conversation, and I just did
Yeah.
a whole series on networking and relationship building, and there's such a key
Oh,
theme around you're bringing your humanness to the
yeah.
conversation and to the interaction, not the check the box, check the box, checks the box. Um, so I
Mhm.
totally agree with you. We can't talk about the idea of termination without talking about fear and anxiety
Yes.
and
Yes.
triggers, and it's such a normal part of this experience. And again, you talk about this with so much comfort and graciousness, and how you relate to your stories is just beautiful. And you specifically talk about 7 triggers and ways to manage it, and I'd love to hear in your own words, which trigger was most difficult for you and how did you manage it?
Right. I talk about specific triggers like the employment application, the reference check, the interview, that question, what happened, things of that nature. I think for me, it was the employment application.
Mm.
And and some old-fashioned organizations, one that I applied to. After they make you an offer, they ask you to fill out a 4-page application. And on that application, you have to go through your entire history, which makes you look at, oh my God, this is where I've been, this is what I've done. But the biggest question again was, why did you leave? And I still have the 2 pages of sentences that I typed out to answer that question. Reorganization, looking for new opportunities. And I'd look at that and say, oh, I know that's what people say when they were let go. All these different things that people had said to me. And my best friend, who had been with me through this entire process, I read them all to her, and she said, Robin, no one reads these. Just press send.
Oh, I love
And
it.
and I did. And there was no sonic boom. The big lightning bolt didn't come out of the sky. And I
Mm,
realized, oh my gosh, that was such a trigger for me,
mm.
trying to detail the narrative of my history, that I've got to go out and take a walk or do something to get out of my own head.
Well, what's great about that is, first of all, a great friend that keeps you in
Yes. Oh,
action
she is.
instead of being paralyzed by
Mhm.
the fear, the anxiety, the story we tell ourselves around what's
Yes.
actually going to happen on the
Yeah.
back end. I think that's a really important piece of advice right there, is to stay in action.
To stay in action, and the fear and anxiety that lead people to catastrophize, you just need somebody to say press send.
Right. Right.
you know
Yes. So my last question is how you move the reader towards the end of the book into using things like affirmations and how to have a healthy mindset. And you end the book so beautifully with a chapter dedicated to individuals who are sharing their stories of success and the advice as they move forward. And by the way, my favorite affirmation was, this is so good. I am a hot
Yeah.
property. My biggest challenge will be choosing the right opportunity. I just thought that was it just brought a huge smile on my face. I loved it so much. So, when you think, Robin, about your own journey, tell us where you are now and what's next for you.
So, before I say specifically about that, I just want to reference the story about the woman who wanted to leave her job for 5 years, and she was afraid, and she finally did it and left her job and became the producer of films that she wanted to become, and was so much happier.
Mm,
And for me, I also have been able to exercise my creative side for others, not for organizations. So I'm able to
mm,
write more. I have a blog called Moving Forward, where monthly I put out articles, and I still get comments from people who were the original readers, that thanking me for what I say. I've been able to structure what I've learned, didn't know when I was in a bubble, is a portfolio kind of life,
mm,
where I consult for fundraising organizations that I really respect and admire. I coach women who are going through this. They find me, or people tell them to find me, or they read my book. I give workshops, and I'm continuing to write both fiction and nonfiction. I have a novel that I'm submitting to my publisher. She writes press. And I have a book on leadership, even though it's a saturated market, that I have outlined, that takes the same sort of humanistic, real world approach
mm.
that's in this book. The things that people don't tell you, the
Yes.
emotional arc of leadership and of those you lead. So like I say in the beginning, this is an opportunity I never even knew existed, and a life I never knew existed. And it's so much more dimensional
Mm.
than the life I had before, which I also enjoyed. I also enjoyed. So, uh, these chapters can be to have an abundance mindset rather than a
Mhm.
scarcity mindset. I think that's the end result of this, to try to get to that point.
I love that you're experiencing such a full life
Hmm.
and that you've integrated something so painful, but have extrapolated how beautiful it can be as well. And feel very grateful that you've put this book out into the world. And I
Oh, thank
know
you.
it's going to help a lot of people. And I'm looking forward to seeing how this grows and evolves for you. And it's been such a pleasure being in this conversation with you.
Thank you, Jeannie. I really enjoyed this. I loved your questions, and thank you for reading the book so closely, and thank you for liking it so much. That really warms my heart.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Warriors at Work show. If you are interested in learning more about what we do at the Warriors at Work show and platform, be sure to go over to my website, Jeannie Coomber, and subscribe to my monthly Warrior Playbook newsletter. I share everything that I'm up to month by month, as well as some lessons and insights that I've learned. I'm also interested in hearing any feedback you have about this conversation or future topics. So reach out to me directly on jc@jeanniecoomber.com or on LinkedIn. Be sure to tell your friends and your colleagues about this Warriors at Work conversation. Subscribe, review, and rate us. It's the best way to get this message out into the world. Be well.